that diversity statements do more harm than good. Best not to air that view. Too late. I just did. Okay, if you've been a follower of this channel for a long time, you note that I am not a huge fan of diversity statements or diversity, equity, inclusion statements or any such things that have been coming up there. So this article that came across my desk recently in the commentary talks about this in higher ed being against diversity statements. And so there's some interesting things in here. I actually haven't read it all the way through. I've skimmed it quite briefly. To know that there's something at the end that I very much disagree with, actually, which might be a surprise to some of you, but we shall see in a moment. Yes. And I'm actually going to extend some of his, I'm also going to extend, I think, some of the Jonathan's remarks here to be, shall we say, a little bit more, for lack of a better way to describe it, inclusive of those of us who are not professors, but are also in academia. So let's go there. Against diversity statements, appearing October 19th, 2021. A college professor is expected to do all kinds of things apart from research and teaching. Those duties include cooperating with the admissions office to bring in students and working with the advancement office to bring in cash. That also involves joining committees devoted to academic standards, work conditions, athletics, technology, and diversity. This is very true, but it's also very true of more than just college professors. College professors do have to do a lot of that, also, as some of my colleagues might tell you, but so do research scientists, so do staff members who are more in scientific research positions than they are in professorships or in administrative faculty. I do research, yes, but I also do not the kinds of things with the admissions office or things like that because they wouldn't care for me, but I have to write proposals to bring in cash. I have to do those kinds of things alongside of joining other committees and being involved in this, that, and the next thing to help with different centers and other things and what have you. So I may not get involved in the admissions office and, which students are there. I actually have pretty much no say in that. But, I do have to do other things, and so do many other staff who are particularly in research scientist positions or lab tech positions or what have you. They may get involved in more things around the university because they are permanent staff. They are just not college professors or faculty. But for a growing number of universities, the last form of work is decisive, or so their job advertisement suggests. In January 2019, I wrote about an emerging trend in higher education, the requirement that applicants for faculty positions submit, along with statements about teaching and research, quote, diversity statements. In such statements, applicants demonstrate their commitment to drawing in students, staff, and faculty from underrepresented groups, meaning oppressed groups. Yes, and I'm having one of the things about this myself, because the way diversity is laid out as a definition, oftentimes it is referring to things that are, for lack of a better word, surface level, skin deep, if you will. They focus on things like race, sex, gender, what have you. Those are very, very narrow, but that is what they typically tend to mean in the critical theory sense of it by oppressed groups. In here, when you look at the oppression matrix, as we have in the other videos on this channel, they prove their commitment to helping members of those groups feel welcome on campus and to removing arbitrary barriers to their success in class or at work. What was emerging then is more established now. And I will say, barriers that are based on discrimination absolutely should be removed. Period. End of sentence. Later in 2019, Abigail Thompson, professor of mathematics at the University of California, Davis, asserted that several campuses on the vast University of California campus were using diversity statements as a screening tool. Quote, hiring committees, she wrote, are being urged to start the review process by using officially provided rubrics to score the required diversity statements and to eliminate applicants who don't achieve a scoring cutoff. See, yes, actually, when I last talked about this issue of the DEI statements, I did cover this also. Abigail Thompson was also at the time that this happened, she was also the vice president of the American Mathematics Association, and she was the subject of intense pressure and scrutiny attempts to cancel her when she made this statement that this could be used as an ideological litmus test. In fact, that she felt it was being used as that at UC Davis. Here is a job at at Ohio State that has 2 rounds of consideration. The first includes a general cover letter and a separate, quote, equity engagement statement. I've never heard it called that before. That's different. Only if the candidate clears that round is she asked to submit full research and teaching statements. At the University of Hartford, candidates are required to write a short essay about their commitment to the college's diversity goals. In it, candidates should demonstrate, quote, knowledge of what it means to be anti-racist and provide, quote, examples of their own anti-racist values and actions. A, quote, review of applicant diversity statements will precede that of any other application materials. In other words, the University of Hartford won't look at your resume until you've established that you are just. And this is why we have problems with diversity statements, and why I do in particular, because anti-racist, if you're talking about it in terms of the postmodern critical theory kind of vein of it and critical race theory kind of vein of it in particular, this means something very, very specific, and it is not in the Western vein of anti-racist here. Indeed, they tend to revile the Western kind of thought on this, or the modernist kind of thought, or Enlightenment thought on this, and what have you. So having this kind of a statement in here makes this immediately an ideological litmus test that you have to know and espouse to a particular set of values in here. So nope. Efforts to justify these statements are unpersuasive. Yes, colleges and universities can expect faculty members to serve all of their students and to get on with all their faculty and staff. Yes, where arbitrary barriers to advancement exist, universities should work to lower them. I would say lower/eliminate them. But no, even standard issue core university aims, like the free exchange of ideas or truth-seeking, should not be used as candidate screens. Exactly. The DEI statement should not be used as a candidate screen, nor should your commitment to free exchange of ideas or truth-seeking or anything like that. What have you. You shouldn't be using an ideological litmus test, period. Let's put it that way. That's where it gets really, really way too far for me, that you're not about anything of that. I mean, if you're having to ask somebody, will you commit to supporting free speech and all this kind of stuff, it's funny, you may be asking for an ideological litmus, you may be putting an ideological litmus test to see if somebody will reject the idea of having an ideological litmus test. Random thought. But it is unpersuasive. When I asked around about diversity statements that I saw being done in different places, some of the responses that I got, we just want to see that people will work well with others. Then why not just ask about times when they've worked in teams or how they've done in collaboration, and then ask in the interview for who among your references can corroborate what you're telling me? A diversity statement doesn't make sense for that. Likewise, for the idea of using it to screen for compassion. Well, why does somebody need to have a particular ideology to be considered compassionate? Those kinds of things. This goes back to the Heterodox Academy article, the same thing about DEI statements. That was on the other video I'd done on DEI statements. One reason to avoid using them, DEI statements that is, that way, is that universities claim to value heretics even in core matters. University has room for the Marxist, for whom the claim that universities seek truth rings hollow. It has room for the academic abolitionist, who thinks that neoliberal university in which he plies his trade should be dismantled. It has room for economists, who argue that many of the degrees universities sell aren't worth the price. These diversity statements suggest universities have no room for dissenters against prevailing theories about the causes and remedies for racial and other inequalities. Okay. I'm going to disagree with him right here. Says a university has no room for dissenters. I'm pretty much there already. I'm pretty cynical in this, in that if a university is asking for a DEI statement, that they are very, very likely saying they don't have room for dissenting thoughts against the prevailing theories and wisdom right now about the causes and remedies for racial and other inequalities. I'm saying they're probably just saying it. Abigail Thompson asks us to imagine a, quote, classical liberal naive enough to say in a diversity statement that she seeks, quote, to treat every person as a unique individual, not as a representative of their gender or ethnic group. Thank you. Next. And yes, it's possible to imagine a diversity statement that isn't an ideological test. It is. I agree with that. It could be very possible to do that. I do not think it necessarily is at this particular moment. But the advice we hear about what to put in such diversity statements suggests that diversity statements will often be just that. For example, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher the guy's name, this person's name. I'm so sorry, whoever you are. Pardis Madavi? And Scott Brooks disparage statements that focus on experiences that may be relevant to one's concern for campus inequality and insist that candidates address the million-dollar question, quote, does this lead to fighting structural issues found in the academy? But if you what if you think, as Glenn Lowry of Brown University does, that structural racism is an empty category? Glenn Lowry is not a fan of the structural racism construction at all. He very much doesn't think very much of it at all as being a thing. What if you believe, as he does, that adherence to this idea would rather invoke, quote, shadowy causes for inequality and demand solidarity than investigate the multiple, complex, sometimes poorly understood drivers of inequality? Thank you, next. Or what if you think that Amna Khalid and Jeffrey Snyder, both left of center, are correct that diversity statements do more harm than good? Best not to air that view. Too late. I just did. You may be evaluated by one of their colleagues who thinks that quote, any professor who is not on board with the mission to dismantle white supremacy at their institution cannot possibly be making a contribution, end quote, to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. You're not sure that the uber progressive university you're applying to is a bastion of white supremacy? Thank you. Next. In the hands of faculty bodies that are overwhelmingly left-liberal, diversity statements are likely to function as litmus tests that further narrow the ideological range of faculty. There is little evidence that such ideological narrowing will do anything to promote education or justice in the academy, but perhaps it will make life easier for those who find dissent irritating. This is a great short piece here in commentary. And again, I would actually quite say with this that likely to function, no, they will function if they are constructed like this and tailored for very specific things, like having that thing of showing knowledge of what it means to be an anti-racist. That has very specific connotations of what that means right now. And so you have to ascribe to that if you want to be at that university. So if it's things constructed like that in particular, it is not very likely it will be a litmus test as far as I'm concerned. And I think this is incredibly harmful because it brings in so many groups of people that only think in one particular perspective and direction. And that makes it much harder if you're doing research to actually get at the truth, which is what a university is supposed to be doing. Your primary purpose, your telos, as I've said many times on this channel, of the university and of the scientist, is to find the truth. And it doesn't matter if you dislike the dissent. You have to have the dissent to be able to get at the truth. So again, DEI statements, I don't think they're good things. I think they're just going to push for more conformity of thought. And that's pretty much all they're about good for. But could be wrong. We'll see in time, I'm sure. But I don't have high hopes for such things. They feel like ideological litmus tests to me. Anyway, that's it for now. I think this is a good piece. Of course, will be linked in the description. If you like this video, hit the like button on the way out the door. Share the video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, all that good jazz. And of course, don't forget, pop on over to shiasophia.locals.com if you want to have some fun and talk science without the censorship of YouTube. And that's it for now. So until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious, my friends.